Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience practical application of business acumen essential for success in today's dynamic professional landscape. I'm Dr. Jennifer Miles Thomas, and in today's episode, we will discuss the professional journey from navigating to the daily tasks of being a care deliverer to helping lead dynamic healthcare organizations with all of their complexities. Joining me today for this discussion is Dr. Robert Uzzo. He is currently the president and CEO of Fox Chase Cancer Center, part of the Temple Health System in Philadelphia. He also serves as the executive vice president for cancer service for the Temple Health System and senior associate dean of the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miles Thomas. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we can just get right into it. Everyone starts in this journey as a clinical provider of care. Can you describe just your journey, how you got in this position, important and key decisions in your journey, and just explain it to our listeners?
Well, thank you. So I think the most kind of important thing here is that this was never what I intended to do. I did not have a grand master plan when I came out of residency or fellowship training that this is where I thought my career would lead me. In fact, 20 or so years ago, I always believed that this was going to lead me to maybe be a chair, of a small program, then maybe jump to a bigger program, and then, just continue to do good clinical work and try my best to make a difference and contribute in some way, shape, or form. But along the way, I was influenced by a number of observations, experiences, and then that kind of led me to sort of pursue maybe a little bit of a different path that sort of brought notice to what I was doing, and then perhaps gave me opportunities to sort of elevate my career in a different way. And so the long and the short story is that coming out of fellowship, I was one of the first people in a very small program, and all I wanted to do is to do a good job, like most physicians, make a difference in people's lives, do good work, be recognized for my work, and sort of maybe see where that took me, and maybe contribute a bit academically. And so really my portfolio, if you will, was just simply trying to be a good clinician, and then adding on that maybe some clinical and translational research, and layering on that exposure sort of locally, regionally, and then ultimately nationally for what we were trying to do here at Fox Chase. And over the course of the first couple of years, from assistant to associate professor, that seemed to be going well, and maybe a little bit faster here than elsewhere. I had a lot of opportunity to build. And, one of the things about most organizations, including Fox Chase, is that success begets success, and suddenly people start to notice. And how you handle those successes, I think, very much either set you up for future successes in different directions, or perhaps, maybe set you up for, stagnation. And so I really took an approach that was really a can-do approach. I recognized that, there were multiple stakeholders in very large, complex, medical systems. And so I started to talk about things that maybe other doctors at the time weren't talking about, why we're doing certain things, why we're processing things certain ways, why we're operating in certain ways, and trying to look for opportunities to fix systems that simply weren't working as effectively or efficiently as they could. And so, I could give you lots of examples, but by and large, that's what kind of took notice of sort of the level, the administrative level, right? He seems like somebody who can get things done. He seems like somebody who can communicate effectively. He seems like somebody that might be able to convince the physicians to change behaviors that they may be more hesitant to change if an administrator asks them, whereas he speaks their language. And even though he's a urologist, he's, part of, he's been through the training, he's been through the stresses of taking care of patients, and maybe he can give them, some advice and push them in a direction or change the culture that might be harder for an administrator to do. And so from there, I kind of went to, simple stuff. We didn't have a very robust faculty practice plan. So I stood one of those up, and We looked across the country and started to talk to people about what they're doing and what they're struggling with in these practice plans. And so, having stood that up, I then sort of, became the president of the practice plan. And then we went through multiple iterations of the practice plan. It became really a collaborative effort to sort of look at different stakeholders in as physicians and as hospital providers, and where the two sort of can work together, and where the two frankly have some stresses, and how do you work that out. And so over the course of the next series, that kind of led me to, division chief and department chair. And I sort of elevated, as a clinician as well, an academician as well. And, fortunately, it didn't hurt that I got some very grateful patients and some philanthropy. And so I started to look at this as a portfolio, as opposed to, a single career of clinical, a clinical minded career. It was a portfolio. What was I offering to the organization? What was the organization offering in response to me? And just trying to sort of not be that difficult person that was always saying no, 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 but as opposed to that, just saying maybe, how, yes, and figuring out how both sides of a negotiation can sort of be beneficial. And so over the course of time, that led to increasing responsibilities that ultimately landed me here. I mean, along the way, a couple of pivots and shifts. A couple of other job offers, opportunities that sort of I did not accept, because this looked like a direction that was going to be successful. And frankly, as I did that, I also sort of took some more formal training. As I said, this was not something that I intended to do early on, but formally, I started with a couple of classes. The Harvard class for departmental chairs I found to be very transformative. I took that like 9 years after I got out of training. Just start to think about the complexities of operations, and so the operational inefficiencies of most hospitals that physicians really struggle with, that make our lives very difficult, and also make patients' experiences suboptimal. And then I sort of went from there to take a course at Wharton in negotiating, and some other courses, and some executive leadership training, and ultimately I decided that it was time for me to get my MBA, and that sort of accelerated this path forward.
That's an amazing journey. And first of all, let me just say you presented it very humbly, very much as a servant leadership. So you started clinically. You recognized that some of the hurdles that we physicians are faced with daily just aren't a quick fix. You actually looked outside of your small world and then you saw the bigger picture. And I think it's very, very important to be emphasized that it's processes and systems. We're not blaming people, we're trying to change the process. And then once you begin to do that, I think you also accelerated higher and higher. And people recognize that you are trying to be a problem solver instead of someone who just complains. And I feel like a lot of us complain, but only a few of us are willing to take the time and dedicate our life to making the change. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody has good ideas. The question is, how do you implement those ideas? And, we all sort of have these great ideas and throw them on the table, and then we wonder why nothing happens with them. And the reason is because it takes a lot of hard work to implement those ideas. I mean, frankly, I tend to have a lot of heuristics, or frameworks that I try to use, that I read outside of urology. I spend a lot of time sort of reading interesting books, history books and business books and this and that, just because it's really not all that different from what we all contend with every single day. And there's one book that I remember reading some time ago called How Complex Systems Fail. And it was by a professor, a physician, I think, named Richard Cook in the University of Chicago. And it was just an acknowledgement that healthcare is a complex system. And as such, it's intrinsically hazardous, and there's multiple points of failure. And that every time you put change in there, it introduces new forms of failure. And so those are things that clinicians can solve. And frankly, we're so busy taking care of patients. We're so busy trying to keep up with the most recent, modern, latest, that we often forget that, administrators need us to make those changes. We are the change agents. We cannot just put some problem on the table with our proposed solution without trying to implement how that looks. And so I could give you lots of examples of it, but one of my favorites is that I always make the point that there are two really, the equation is really simple to optimize the outcomes. It's clinical excellence plus operational excellence. Clinical excellence is basically strong medical decision making, and most physicians feel very competent and capable there. But operational excellence, that's really that's who picks up the phone, how long does it take them to pick up the phone, how do you land the person here in your clinic, effectively, and get the information you need to have an effective conversation. We deconstruct the process. I mean, this is 20 years in the making, and it's all sort of seems quite commonsensical now, but 10 or 15 years ago, most physicians weren't talking about it. And I think probably the reason is because as margins have decreased, as clinical margins have decreased, you've been forced to talk about operational inefficiencies. And what patients mostly experience, they don't really experience the clinical excellence because they expect that. But what they really experience is, the operational inefficiencies, or conversely, the operational excellence. And I dare say that, that equation, clinical excellence plus operational excellence equals optimized outcomes, has really served me well, because most physicians only think about the clinical part, not the operational part. But we know better than others what the negative consequences are and the intrinsic hazards are of those operational inefficiencies.
I agree completely. Well, this entire podcast is about leadership and business, and that's exactly what you're discussing. Let's look outside of our box, look at operations, look at operational efficiencies, let's look at system dynamics, how small changes can affect things downstream that we wouldn't even think about. Yes, it is hard to change the direction of a boat, but it is our job as clinicians to help that happen. I
Right.
completely agree with you. So, if we're looking at the next generation of leaders, what is leadership? Like, how do leaders contribute? How would someone that's a urologist now, either a resident or a faculty member, how would they transition into leadership?
Well, I think it just starts with a real willingness to sort of, be part of the conversation. You have to be at the table. I'm not trying to suggest that you have to agree with everything people say, but you have to recognize that, everybody has their stakeholders, people that they are accountable to, and people they want to advocate for. And I've got a very simple, framework, or, a very simple way of defining leadership. Leadership means put yourself in between those who report to you, or those who sort of are sort of, some way organizationally, on lower than you, and put yourself between them and those who are above you, and advocate up and advocate down, and hold up accountable to down, and hold down accountable to up. I mean, really, leadership is about advocacy and accountability. You can't have one without the other. They're two sides of, the same coin, different sides of the same coin. And frankly, I can give you example after example where, I, as a division leader, a department chair, or even a president and CEO, I want to advocate for my people. And I believe it's important to advocate for my people. But at the same time, I cannot just be seen as a person who goes to the negotiating table only looking for something from somebody else. I need to be willing to hold my people accountable and therefore give something to them as well. So it's advocacy and accountability. And that's sort of like, it's a way of thinking that physicians, generally speaking, have not been taught in medical school. We've been taught to be units of one. I do it this way because that's how my professor did it when I trained. I do it that way because that's how they always did it where I trained. And instead, you have to start thinking about what can we do, what can we standardize, and what can we vary. And I have another little maxim. You cannot vary effectively until you standardize, meaning you don't know where the ability to vary comes, with any process, or, or operational, logistic, unless you have some part of that standardized. So my little mathematic formula is, we try to standardize 80% of our processes, and then we are able, therefore, to lead through the 20% of things that require necessary variations. I'm not looking for cookbook medicine. I'm looking for medicine that recognizes that we cannot all be units of one, and a physician leader needs to be able to take people forward, when we have those conversations.
I completely agree. And I think just part of our training is focusing on units of one. You're wanting to make sure you get the optimal outcome for your patient, but you have to expand your thought. Can all of the patients have the optimal outcome? And that's the algorithm you're talking about, the formula you're talking about.
That's right.
80% across the board, this is what we all do. 20%, yes, patients are individuals, we are individuals. The variation can come there.
That's right.
Well, what about the C-suite is most challenging for you?
Well, I mean, most physicians don't feel very comfortable when it comes to talking about the financial stuff, and so you have to get used to sort of listening, reading a balance sheet. You have to get used to sort of being uncomfortable. Just like early on in medicine, when you first took your first steps as an attending. And you no longer had that person across the table to bounce things off of, and you were it, right? You had a little bit of uncertainty sometimes because you saw people do it so well that you just thought that it was easy. But I think that when you get into the C-suite, you recognize that there's lots of decisions that get made in terms of uncertainty. How to negotiate a good contract, not just with an individual, but with a vendor or with a payer. What are the sort of forces that you don't recognize, the external forces that you are unaware of, the governmental forces, the regulatory forces, what are the sort of nuances of some of the laws, locals, state or national laws that you were never educated on. So you need to lean on other people and their expertise. And they've got a significant expertise. I will say that my C-suite team here is really phenomenal, and they really are able to educate me. So I had this little talk at the Society of Urological Oncology about 6 months ago. It was a talk sponsored by and in reflection of Joe Smith's excellent mentorship. And I'll just tell you what the title of the talk was. The title of the talk was "Take Inventory, Embrace Failure, Move Forward, and Be Grateful." Those are my 4 steps for leadership. Be willing to look in the mirror and recognize what you don't know, and be humble about it, right? Understand that there are people that run large healthcare systems that do it very well, and you could learn as much from them as you could from your professors in the operating room when you were a resident. The first thing. The second thing is you're gonna fail. And you shouldn't hide from it. Just like when you go from M&M, I tell my fellows, when you have a significant morbidity, you don't run away from it, you run toward it. And the same thing in the C-suite. Run toward the failure, learn from the failure, identify what you could have done differently. Hopefully it wasn't catastrophic, like mortality. But I like to think of, the C-suite very much like I like to think of M&M. Move forward, right? Once you've been able to do that, you cannot, I like to say, in life, in leadership, like in life, you're either dying or you're growing or you're dying, right? You could either grow quickly or grow slowly, die quickly or die slowly, but you've only got 2 situations. You're either growing or you're dying. And so, frankly, moving forward means you want to progress the organization, the people in the organization, and then finally be grateful. Be grateful to the people who really have helped you get here and the people who surround you, and recognize, as Colin said in his book, Good to Great, there are some people who should not be on the bus with you, so to speak, but be grateful for those that really should be, and sort of build a culture around that group and that cadre of people that you're grateful for.
Yes. What you're saying also is you've been an advocate of lifelong learning. Like literally, you've figured out how to navigate that from clinical to business to large organizational managing, mentoring, running this large corporation. Now, how did you seek out what instruments would help you along the way? So you did mention earlier you took a couple courses, then you went back to get your MBA. How did you even find these courses? What resources did you use?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with, they talk about the 5 big personality types, and I've thought a lot about sort of, what I fit in. People do all sorts of sort of personality assays, et cetera. I've never done any of those things, but I do think a lot when I sort of think about looking in the mirror. And one of the things that, I think is really important in this is to be curious and to be diligent. I think those are really 2 great assets that I try to have. And I always look for that in people that I hire. Are they curious and are they diligent? And the reason that I say that kind of thing is because along the way, my curiosity has led me to understand how people have led various different, in various different, industries across different times and different stresses and crises. And one of the things that I've learned, and this is the old sort of University of Michigan Don Abedian model, is structure informs process, process informs outcome. And that's sort of a little way of thinking it, like, and what that really means is culture. You have to build culture. You have to elevate culture. Culture will not build itself. It's like this whole, Sisyphus thing. It's rolling the ball up the hill. As soon as you stop applying pressure, that ball will roll right over you. So building culture is really important. And so I became attuned to that. I became to think about that. I thought about that, and as I was thinking about financial things in my personal life, risk making decisions in my career personally and professionally. And I sort of realized that, as Peter Drucker once said, culture eats breakfast, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you have to build culture. So once you realize that diligence is important, once you realize that lifelong learning or curiosity is important, once you realize that, and you could sort of communicate that effectively, I can't underestimate the importance of being a good, or at least trying to be your best communicator at every level. When you're an M&M and you've got something to add, communicate it effectively. When you have to stand up in front of a group, make sure it is your best opportunity to communicate how you think, because people really respond to those who try to think forward and people who try to organize their thoughts. It's really hard. You sit in these national meetings and you hear great lectures and you hear really kind of so-so lectures. Ask yourself, what's the difference? The difference is usually organization and enthusiasm, curiosity and diligence. That's what it is. And when you do that, you use that and you try to build a culture, people respond, and then they give you opportunities. Now, I didn't look to be chairman of the Department of Surgery here. I'm a urologist, but that opportunity was asked of me, and I decided it was a reasonably good time in my career. And if I didn't do it, somebody else might. So I'll jump forward. And so I stepped forward, and then one thing led to the next. And as you say, it's all incremental. Next thing you know, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to learn a little bit more about negotiating. So I asked if I could take the course down at Wharton, for example. So I sought out those opportunities, and then other times, the opportunities availed themselves to me.
Definitely. Well, it's been a very interesting journey, and you've done an excellent job so far.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, honestly, I look to other people who've done it. David Mill at the University of Michigan, he's done a great job. I mean, we've got Dan Theodorescu at, he was at University of Colorado, and now he's at Cedars-Sinai. I mean, great people. Ian Thompson was, was a cancer center director at University in San Antonio. I mean, Peter Scardino at Memorial Sloan Kettering. There are so many examples of urologic leaders leading large organizations, meaningfully. I mean, there's so many of them. Steve Jones, for example, at Innova. It's just so many. I mean, urologists really understand the medical side a little bit better than most surgeons, the surgical side certainly better than most non-surgeons. And really, we're in a very good and dynamic specialty where we have technical skills, where we have innovative technologies. It really does, breed a group of people that can lead, and lots of examples. I'm sorry if I missed anybody.
Well, thank you. Let's talk just about your day to day.
Mhm.
So, describe one of your days. What are the stress points? What are the struggles of running an entire hospital?
Well, so I really, when I took this job, I really felt it important to maintain my clinical presence, and that's maybe a little bit unusual to the degree that I've tried to do it, but I tried to structure it around having a good team around me. So I really do try to maintain one full operative day a week and at least one clinical day a week that's non-operative. So that's a 40% effort right there, on most weeks. And the reason I did that is because I just felt, like you mentioned before, being a servant leader, it's hard to sort of make people, pay attention to or follow, rules or policies that you yourself aren't subject to. So I mean, I really have tried to do that as best as I can. And besides, we've been, at this point in your career, you feel fairly adept at these types of things. And you're a little hesitant to give them up and just, become an administrator. But I thought it is a servant leadership thing. So I do that is still about 40% of my time. Most of my other time is really structured around, and one of the difficulties is understanding exactly how my cancer center, which used to be a freestanding independent cancer center, fits into a health system now. And how do you integrate across a geographically diverse health system with a medical school, with a university, with all of the sort of, bureaucracy, infrastructure, administrative stresses that go through all that? That's probably one of my, bigger learning points, and one of my sort of bigger, opportunities to sort of continue to progress. Because there's lots of different stakeholders across a very diverse ecosystem that is an academic medical center. I think you've probably heard it said, if you've seen one cancer center, you've seen one cancer center. The same thing could be said about academic medical centers. If you've seen one academic medical center, you see one, meaning that they're all very, very complicated and all very, very distinct and different. And you've got to learn the cultures, the processes, the personalities, the politics through all those things. Now, that's sort of, just strategically, that's kind of how I spent my time. On a much more practical level, I really do really use very specific tools when it comes to trying to communicate culture. I have a senior leadership meeting every Friday morning, an hour and a half meeting, 90 minutes. It has all my chairs. It has all my senior administrators. It has everybody who needs to know what's going on at the medical center. We have a very structured, format. And by that, I only mean that we really try to make it a very actionable meeting. It's 90 minutes. People don't have time for long 90 minutes meetings where they're going to hear a lot of background information. So it's kind of a red light, yellow light, green light type of situation where we really do try to communicate. Here's what you need to know. Here's what's changed. Here's what's coming down the pike, from whether it's a focus on IT, focus on HR, what have you, focus on contracting, focus on process, focus on throughput, and it's really resulted and great things. We've increased our new patient volumes 18% over the last 3 years, and that's tough in this market. It's a very competitive market here in Philadelphia, and so really just trying to connect the dots. I think probably one of the biggest part of my jobs, as I can sort of consider it, philosophically, is to connect the dots. I got to connect the dots above me with the dots below me. And to the extent that I sort of talked about that advocacy and accountability, that's what I'm trying to do: advocate and account above and below and bidirectionally.
Yeah, and it seems that you consider both of them your teams. Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier was just on the bus and making sure the bus is going in the correct direction, and then making sure the right people are on the bus, and then making sure the right people are in the right seats in the bus. And it sounds like you have amazing teams. How did you find these teams? We all have some difficulties and struggles just with our day to day. So how did you forecast to create these types of teams that will continue to push the boulder up and maintain the culture even without you in place?
Well, thank you. So one of the things is, you have to recognize you inherit an organization at the time you take the lead chair in a status that it was in. Maybe you were part of that, building that, and maybe you weren't. So you kind of, you kind of inherit a time frame, a time period, in the organizational's evolution. So at the time I inherited this, we had a bit of a crisis, to be frank. And so, what people generally do in times of crisis is they elevate. Either that or they leave. So it's fight, it's flight, or it's relate. And I've always tried to sort of relate. Fight, flight, relate. Those are the three options that you have when you're trying to process a new position, in certainly in terms of crises. So I was fortunate enough to inherit some very, very good people. Mike Young, who's the CEO of the entire health system, he has been doing this for 30 years. The man really there's nothing he hasn't seen. Like any good surgeon who goes to the operating room and doesn't encounter very many things that he or she hasn't seen. Mike Young has not seen, has seen just about everything as it comes to sort of hospital operations and academic medicine. So I was fortunate and I am fortunate to be his student, his pupil in that regard. Similarly, when we hit this crisis, he simultaneously, recruited a number of very, very good outside people from places like UPMC for our CFO, and for City of Hope for our COO, and Vanderbilt for our CNO. So he brought in outside people that, a lot of people like working where they work, and they don't like really to get up and move, so often. And so what happens if you're not careful is the culture can stagnate from just sort of this internal ossification. But he brought good people in, and then sort of it was my job to sort of bring them together. So he brought them to the table, and I sort of brought them closer in. And so I was fortunate like that. But I think it's important for a new leader, as they think about it, like anything, you are a benefactor or a victim of the time that you sort of step forward. And at that point, every time I start to think about what isn't, I start to dream about what could be. And if you sort of take the yes I can as opposed to no way we can attitude, I hate to sort of be Pollyanna about it, but a lot of it's just a matter of how you approach conflict and crises, and change. And if you approach those things as a physician, saying how do we make this better, I'm not trying to suggest that doesn't require you to change, but it also requires other people to change. And when people realize that it's not unidirectional, when people realize that it's not all losing and no gaining, when people realize that that there are sort of frameworks and boundaries, people generally respond favorably to that. I mean, I have this conversation all the time, Dr. Miles, that basically, is that, physicians respond to a lot of things, only one of which is money, right? I mean, like anybody, right? Money is important, right? But the idea is you can pay me as much as you want, but if I'm miserable at work every day, why would I stay? Right. So you have to recognize rewards systems. You have to recognize, opportunities to sort of call people out for all the good things that they do, what's recognized and what's unrecognized. I have this little thing every Friday in my senior leadership where I really, I have this thing called, I sort of stole it, if you will, from Penn State. My son went to Penn State. I just do this thing I call We Are Fox Chase. And what I do is I ask my senior leaders to nominate somebody on their team who otherwise you might cross in the hallway, that you might not ever know what that person does, or what part they play in the care that we administer. I once read sort of article once about how Dr. DeBakey did this as well, and he did this with somebody who used to clean his operating rooms. And when they interviewed that man who was in environmental services, and they asked him about his career and his retirement, he said, "We help people get healthy." It wasn't Dr. DeBakey, it was we. And that's sort of the idea that I try to bring forward. Some of it is, it may sound like business speak, but frankly, people want to be part of a team that's doing good things. Getting back to the growing or dying metaphor, people want to do things that make the difference. And when they go home, it's great to be well paid, but it's really great to feel like you made a difference.
Completely agree. Well, let's talk about the future now. What does the future look like for hospitals, for physician leaders?
Well, yeah, the future is always, quite uncertain. So, I think that when I was, just coming out of fellowship, I remember, lamenting, what was happening. In fact, I probably got all my negativity out during my entire training, because when I was a medical student, I thought, oh my God, we studied so hard, 4 years plus 6 years, plus I did another 3 years. I mean, it was like 13 years or more of training, from college. And I thought, well, the world is going to change by the time I get out there. They're not going to respect physicians. They're not going to pay physicians. What good will all this be? And frankly, I had a lot of good mentors, and I remember having sort of like a sidebar conversation with Eric Klein at the clinic, and he's like, no, he said, the cream always rises. Good people will always get rewarded. Good people will always have good things occur to them, not universally, but mostly. And so look for those opportunities. And so I'd say the same thing about what the future holds. Look, nobody can predict what happens to medicine. We recognize that it's unsustainable in its current format, that spending, 20 to 25% of the GDP on healthcare is unsustainable. We recognize that there's a lot of entrants to the market that absorb a lot of the margins. I mean, just think about the EHR, and the vast hundreds of millions of dollars spent, contracting large systems for software. Think about what's happening to private practice and the fact that so many physicians are, aligning with or being employed by large systems. Think about the possibility that, there may only be, 10, 20, 30 large health systems in the country in the future, and think about sort of, if you think about it, you say, well, that just means that physicians are going to be interchangeable widgets, that physicians are going to be expendable units, or that, physicians are going to be commoditized, if you will. You can think about it that way, or you can think about, how do I make a difference wherever I'm going to work so that my path can sort of, elevate, escalate, progress. What does my career success pathway look like? And it usually looks like what you'd expect. You work within the boundaries of the culture and the organization that you're in. And as it evolves, if you're, curious and diligent, you'll figure out what the next step is. So the future for hospitals, I think, is that more consolidation. I think the future of hospitals is more physician leadership, effective physician leadership. In the past, physician leadership meant that you just simply led the clinical volume. Your job as a chair was to get more people to do more cases. Your job soon will be as a chair to get people not only to do, their share of cases, but to do them better, to improve the outcomes, to improve the quality, to fix the processes, because we will at some point either move towards a European system or we will move to a true value-based system. But frankly, most large medical centers right now, at least 40 to 50% are governmental paid, right? They're Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. And so there will be a point where, the bureaucracy gets either sort of so large and so big that physicians will have more leverage, not less, or alternatively, there will be a European-based, European light system. So I think that physicians, and my son's in medical school, so I have these conversations with him all the time. I think that the future of medicine, it has never been better to be in cancer medicine as it is right now. I mean, we are really in the renaissance of something special. I like to say that, at least in cancer medicine, there's never been, more progress in a short period of time, other than perhaps antibiotics. I mean, since when have we moved from, survival rates of 10 months to survival rates of 60 months, like they have in kidney cancer, right? And that's all in this course of 10 or 15 years. So lots of new technologies, lots of new techniques, lots of new moral issues, lots of new financial issues, and they really desperately need physicians leading the way. It takes a long time to do what you do, in the operating room. It takes a long time to do what I do. You can't just mint a new Dr. Miles Thomas. You have to take a decade. And so you are a very, very valuable commodity in this equation.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for these significant insights. I think you've given us a different outlook just on health systems, the process, how you navigate your clinical career as well as your professional career. So thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you very much to our audience for joining us today on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast.
Invest in your leadership and business skills at AUA 2024 with the Institute for Leadership and Business track. The ILB track features a total of 7 live courses offered from Thursday, May 2nd through Sunday, May 5th, with additional on-demand content to supplement. Whether you are starting your career, seeking career advancement or professional development, or looking to master the business challenges facing today's urology practice, the ILB track offers education to support your needs and professional growth. To accommodate the busy and robust schedule of AUA 2024 and to ensure that participants have access to all programs in the ILB track, each session will be recorded and can be accessed on demand, unless otherwise noted. Visit auanet.org/AUA 2024 to learn more and add the ILB track to your annual meeting registration. See you in San Antonio.